The bell above the door barely had time to ring before Maddie's hand closed around my wrist. I'd come to pick up my dress, the dusty rose mother-of-the-bride gown she'd altered over 3 separate fittings, taking it in at the waist, lifting the hem a 1/4 inch, making it exactly right. My daughter was getting married in 4 days. I had 7 things on my to-do list and exactly 40 minutes to spare. Maddie didn't look like herself. She was 68, Polish-American, tiny and fierce, the kind of woman who could thread a needle in a moving car and never miss. She'd been running this alterations shop in Claremont for 31 years. I'd been coming here since I was 34. I trusted her with things I trusted almost no one with. The hem of my husband's funeral suit, the blazer I wore to testify before the city council, the gown I'd worn the night my catering business won its first major contract. Today her eyes were wrong. "Back room," she whispered. "Now, don't say a word." I didn't ask questions. Something in her face told me not to. She led me past the fitting mirrors, past the rows of plastic-wrapped formal wear, through a door I'd walked past 100 times without thinking. A storage area. Bolts of fabric, a sewing table, a lamp on a low shelf. She pulled the door shut and clicked off the lamp. Dark. "Listen," she breathed. The wall between the storage room and the consultation room was thin. I could hear everything. 3 voices. The first was my daughter's. "He said the trust transfer is drafted," Bethany was saying. "She just has to sign the estate supplement." He made it sound straightforward. A man's voice, smooth, confident. The voice my daughter had fallen in love with. My future son-in-law, Corbett. "It is straightforward, for us." The language on page 9 transfers fiduciary control the moment the competency assessment is filed. Once Vane submits his report Monday, everything moves. A third voice, clipped, professional, a stranger's voice. "The assessment is already written. I'll date it Monday morning. 6 documented incidents of cognitive decline over the past 7 months. Memory lapses, disorientation, difficulty tracking conversation. It's airtight." Bethany quieter. "And she won't fight it?" Corbett. "She won't understand what happened until it's already done. By the time she figures it out, the accounts will be restructured. We'll have power of attorney, full fiduciary authority over the trust, controlling interest in the company. Wednesday at the latest." "What about Garland?" Bethany asked. "My operations manager, 22 years with me." "He retires," Corbett said flatly, "or he's terminated, his choice." I couldn't feel my hands. Maddie found them in the dark and held them both. The third voice again. "Dr. Vane, I would learn later. I didn't know his name yet. I just knew his voice was calm in the way only truly dangerous people are calm. The facility in Delwood accepts private placements without a waiting list. Comfortable. Discreet. I've placed clients' aunts there before." "She'd hate that," Bethany said very quietly. "She'll adjust," Corbett said. A chair scraped. Footsteps. A door opened and closed, and then there was nothing but the hum of the sewing machine Maddie had left running in the front room and the sound of my own breathing. Maddie turned the lamp back on. Her eyes were wet. "They were here Thursday too," she said. Same conversation. Almost word for word. "I didn't know if I should." She stopped. "I'm sorry, Lavinia." "My dress," I said. "Can you get my dress?" She looked at me for a long moment. Then she went to the back rack and returned with the garment bag, dusty rose visible through the clear plastic. I took it over my arm. "What are you going to do?" she asked. I looked at her, this woman who had known me since my hair was dark and my husband was still alive, and my daughter still called me Mama instead of Mom. This woman who had just handed me the only thing standing between me and losing everything. "I don't know yet," I said. "Thank you, Maddie." I walked out into the September afternoon. The parking lot was busy, a woman loading groceries, 2 kids on bikes, a man laughing on his phone. Everything looked ordinary and nothing was. I put the dress in the back seat. I got in the driver's seat. I sat there. $51 million. That's what my company was worth, according to the last independent valuation. 27 years of work. Hartley Occasions. I'd named it after my husband because he'd believed in it before I did. He died 8 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 61 years old. We'd had 32 years together, and I would have given back every dollar and every contract and every perfectly executed gala just to have had one more year with him. But I didn't get that choice. So I'd kept working. I sat in that parking lot and let it all come back. The year after he died, when I couldn't afford to keep our best chef. The contracts I'd personally driven across the county to negotiate. The nights I'd fallen asleep at my desk and woken up to find Garland had left a blanket over my shoulders and locked the back door on his way out. Bethany had joined the company 6 years ago. She started in event coordination, worked her way up to creative director. She was brilliant at it, inherited her father's calm under pressure and my eye for detail. I'd been proud of her in a way I couldn't always find the words to say. Then came Corbett. He arrived as a financial consultant 18 months ago. Charming, well-credentialed. He had answers for things I hadn't even thought to ask about. Within a year, he'd gone from consultant to boyfriend to fiancé. And somewhere in that time, something had shifted in my daughter that I hadn't been able to name. She'd started suggesting I take more time away from the office. Corbett had started asking, gently, whether I'd considered a succession plan. And 4 months ago, I'd walked out of a board meeting and found myself unable to remember if I'd already gone over the third quarter figures, only to check my notes and realize I simply hadn't gotten to them yet. I was 62. It happened. But I'd started to wonder. In quiet moments, I'd started to doubt myself. Now I understood. The wondering hadn't been natural. It had been installed. I started the engine. I had 4 days. Portia Hale had been my attorney for 14 years. Corporate contracts, property disputes, one particularly difficult partnership dissolution in 2019. She was 55 and meticulous, and when I showed up at her office at 6:30 in the evening without an appointment and placed my phone on her desk with the photo Maddie had texted me. A shot of the document Corbett had left on the consultation room table. She didn't tell me to slow down. She put on her reading glasses and read it twice. "Page 9, I said. She found it, read it again. Her face didn't change, but her jaw tightened. "This is an estate supplement disguised as a trust amendment," she said. "The language here authorizes full fiduciary transfer upon certification of cognitive incapacity by a licensed clinician. The moment a doctor files that assessment, you lose control. Voting rights, trust authority, company shares, all of it. How long do I have to stop it? When does the wedding reception start?" "Saturday, 7 p.m. She looked at the clock on her wall. 62 hours. She pulled a business card from her center drawer and slid it across the desk. A name and a phone number. "Wendell Reed," she said. "Former federal investigator. I've used him on 3 cases. He's thorough and fast. Call him tonight. If there's a trail, he'll find it in 48 hours. I picked up the card. "Lavinia," she paused. "If you expose this, the wedding is over. Your daughter's life changes completely." "I know. Are you ready for that?" I looked at the card in my hand. I've been ready for hard things before. She nodded once. "Go." Wendell Reed met me at a diner on Route 9 at 8:15. He was 60, compact, silver-haired, with the kind of stillness that made you feel like he'd already considered everything you were about to say. He ordered black coffee and didn't touch it. I told him everything. Maddie, the voices through the wall, the document, Dr. Vane's voice talking about a facility in Delwood. The 7 months of subtle suggestions that I was slipping. He wrote in a small notebook, clean, efficient lines. "The doctor," he said. "Do you have a name?" "Not yet. Male, older, professional sounding." "I'll find him." He turned a page. Your future son-in-law, full name, background, how long you've known him. Corbett Ainsley, 37, came to us as a consultant. Has an MBA from Wharton, at least that's what his resume says. He's been in my daughter's life for 18 months. I'll verify it, he made a note. Your operations manager, you said he noticed something. Garland, 22 years with me. He texted last week about unusual vendor payments he couldn't match to any contracts. I told him to hold off until after the wedding. My chest tightened. I should have listened sooner. Reed studied me for a moment. Go home, try to sleep. I'll need 48 hours. I didn't sleep. I lay in the dark and stared at the ceiling and thought about the word Delwood. And how calm Corbett's voice had sounded when he said she'll adjust. At 6 a.m, my phone buzzed, an unknown number, Reed. Found the third party. Name is Archibald Vane. Licensed psychiatrist, private practice, Mercer County. You need to see what I found. He arrived at my house at 2 o'clock the following afternoon with a leather briefcase and 3 folders. Portia was already at the kitchen table. Garland sat in the corner with his arms folded and his face dark. Reed set the folders on the table, red, blue, black. Start with the red, he said. I opened it. A photograph, Corbett shaking hands with a man outside a parking garage, heavy-set, 50s, expensive watch, dated 8 months ago. His name is Denton Varga, Reed said. He's a broker for high-stakes illegal gambling networks operating out of 3 states. Corbett owes him $400,000. He's been paying it in installments for 2 years. The last payment bounced. Garland exhaled sharply. Reed laid out bank statements, 3 wire transfers from a personal account in Corbett's name. Smaller amounts, irregular intervals, the pattern of someone buying time. Buying time he was running out of. The debt deadline is October 15th, Reed said quietly. 10 days after the wedding. October 15th, 10 days from now. I looked at Portia. She looked at me. Blue, Reed said. I opened it. An email chain. Corbett's company account, addressed to the Director of Acquisitions at Meridian Events Group. My largest competitor for 20 years. Subject line, Hartley Client Infrastructure, preliminary transfer. Garland made a sound I'd never heard him make before. The email was dated 14 months ago. It contained our full client database, 412 contacts. Pricing history, vendor relationships, proprietary event formats we'd spent a decade refining. In exchange, $200,000 wired to a shell company called Ainsley Consulting, LLC. He sold your client list, Reed said, and your operational playbook. That's why we lost Meridian Pacific, Garland said, his voice low and stunned. And the Caldecott Foundation, and the Bishop Group. We couldn't understand why they left. We thought we'd done something wrong. I remembered each of those losses. I'd worked harder to replace them. I'd blamed myself. Reed laid 3 more documents on the table. A vendor contract Corbett had deliberately stalled, killing a flagship account. A catering partnership he'd advised against. The right partnership, one that would have brought us $800,000 in new revenue. A client he'd told, quietly and privately, that I was less reliable than I used to be. Total documented losses, Reed said. $2.9 million over 14 months. He wasn't just planning to steal the company. He was devaluing it, making it worth less, so the transfer looked reasonable and a competitor's acquisition would move faster. I stared at the table. And Bethany didn't know, Garland said. It wasn't really a question. I don't know, I said honestly. That's what I have to find out. Reed placed the black folder in front of me. He didn't open it. He looked at me first. This one is about Dr. Vane, he said, and I need to warn you, this is not the first time he's done this. The folder held 4 case summaries. Each one was a woman. Each one was over 60. Each one was wealthy. Each one had been declared cognitively impaired by Dr. Archibald Vane, And in each case, that declaration had rapidly transferred financial control to a family member or associate already positioned to receive it. The first woman lost her home and her savings. She was placed in Delwood Care Center in 2019. She died there in 2021, still appealing the guardianship order. The second woman was still fighting in civil court. The third woman, 71 years old, had escaped because her son-in-law had made one critical mistake. He'd spoken too openly in front of a neighbor who had the courage to act. That woman's name was Odette Farrow. She was, Reed told me, willing to speak on camera Saturday night. I sat with that black folder open in my lap for a long time. I thought about a woman I'd never met, sitting in a facility she'd never chosen, losing days she could never recover. I thought about what Corbett's voice had sounded like saying, "She'll adjust." I thought about my daughter's voice when she'd said she'd hate that. I closed the folder. "I need everything ready by Saturday evening," I said. "Can you do that?" "Already in progress," Reed said. Portia leaned forward. "Emergency injunction to freeze all account transfers is filed and sealed. Judge Harold Fenn, retired, sits on 2 of our client advisory boards, owes you nothing and respects you completely, has approved it. It activates at 9:30 Saturday night on my signal." I looked around my kitchen. Portia, Garland, Wendell Reed. Maddie was coming at noon tomorrow. "If we do this," I said, "there's no taking it back. The wedding ends. My daughter's life turns upside down." No one argued with me. "If Bethany is innocent," Reed said quietly, "she'll understand, eventually. And if she's not." He looked at me steadily. "Then you'll know." The rehearsal dinner was held at the inn on Claremont Lake. White tablecloths, candlelight, 40 guests. Corbett gave a toast about family and trust and building something lasting. He smiled at me across the table with such warmth that I nearly doubted everything. Nearly. Bethany watched him with the expression I remembered from when she was 6 and had brought home a drawing she was very proud of. That specific, earnest joy. She loved him. That was the part that broke my heart. At 9:30, Corbett leaned close to me and said, "You look tired, Lavinia. Big day tomorrow. Get some rest." "I will," I said. Saturday came in pale gray and cool. I dressed in the dusty rose gown. Maddie had made it exactly right. The ceremony was held in the garden behind the inn. 400 white chairs. An archway wound with late-season flowers. An oak along the fence line that had been standing since before I was born. When the music began and the doors opened, I took Bethany's arm. She looked at me with her father's eyes and whispered, "I'm so glad you're here." "There's nowhere else I'd be," I said. We walked together down the aisle, past Garland in the 3rd row, who gave me one small nod, past Portia near the middle, her face composed and still, past Reed, standing at the far edge near the catering tent, watching. We reached the archway. Corbett stood beneath it, smiling. I placed my daughter's hand in his. I sat down. I watched them marry. The reception began at 7. The ballroom was beautiful. Corbett danced with Bethany to a song I had heard at my own wedding 32 years ago, and I felt my husband close beside me, and I closed my eyes for a moment. I'm doing this for us, I thought, for what we built, for her. At 8:40, the MC took the microphone, and now the mother of the bride would like to say a few words. I walked to the podium. I set down the speech I'd written 3 weeks ago. 3 handwritten pages about love and legacy, and watching your daughter become the woman you always hoped she'd be. I didn't look at it. "Good evening, everyone." My voice was steady. I looked out at the faces beneath the chandelier light. Clients, old friends, people who had trusted me with their most important days for 27 years. Thank you for being here to celebrate my daughter. I still remember the afternoon she was born. The first thing she did was grab my finger and refuse to let go. Soft laughter moved through the room. I remember the first event she planned entirely on her own, a 40th birthday party for a client I thought we'd surely lose. She was 28. She worked on that proposal for 3 weeks. When the client called to say it was the finest event he'd ever attended, she sat in my office doorway and cried. I pretended not to see. But I did. Bethany was smiling. Her eyes were bright. She has made me proud every single day. I paused. The room was warm and attentive and completely still. Marriage, I said, is built on honesty, on seeing the person beside you clearly, on never letting someone else define what either of you is worth. The room shifted slightly. A few heads tilted. 4 days ago, I came to pick up this dress, and I learned that the people closest to me had been building something I knew nothing about. Corbett's smile went still. I nodded toward the back of the room. Reed pressed a button at the AV station. A screen descended behind me. I turned back to the audience. I'd like to show you something. The screen lit up, an email, Corbett's name at the top. Subject, Hartley Client Infrastructure, preliminary transfer, the recipient, the dollar amount, the body text. The room erupted. Board members near table 6 were already reading their phones. Portia had sent a briefing document at 8:30. Corbett stood. Lavinia, I can explain. Sit down, please. My voice didn't rise, didn't waver. He stood another moment, then he sat. For 14 months, I said, Corbett Ainsley sold our client relationships, our pricing models, and our proprietary event frameworks to Meridian Events Group. He disguised the payments through a shell company. He collected $200,000 to do it. I waited for the room to absorb that. But that wasn't the reason he needed my company. I clicked the remote. A bank statement appeared on the screen. Corbett's name, a wire transfer notation referencing Denton Varga. Corbett owes $400,000 to an illegal gambling network. The debt is due in 10 days. A woman near the front gasped audibly. My company was not a marriage gift. It was collateral. I looked at Bethany. She had gone completely white. I'm sorry, sweetheart, but you need to know the truth. I clicked the remote again. Dr. Archibald Vane has been documenting my behavior for 8 months. He has filed 6 internal reports of what he calls progressive cognitive decline. He planned to submit a formal competency assessment on Monday morning. A murmur moved through the ballroom. I have my calendar. I have recordings of every meeting from the past 8 months. I have written statements from 22 colleagues who worked directly alongside me. On every date, Dr. Vane claims I was impaired. There was no decline. Every incident in his report is fabricated. Dr. Vane sat at table 11. He had begun rising from his chair and moving toward the exit. Security, I said calmly. 2 men in dark suits, hired as additional catering staff, stepped to block the rear entrance. Vane stopped. Dr. Vane has done this before. I nodded at Reed. The screen changed. 4 names, 4 women, 4 assessments that were never real. The first woman lost everything she owned. She was placed in Delwood Care Center in 2019. She died there in 2021, still trying to get home. Silence. The third woman survived because someone spoke up in time. I paused. That woman is alive, and she is here with us tonight. The screen changed to a live video feed. A woman, 71 years old, silver-haired, sharp-eyed, sitting in a well-lit living room with her hands folded in her lap. My name is Odette Farrow, she said. Dr. Vane told my family I was no longer capable of managing my own affairs. He fabricated test results. He coached my son-in-law on what language to use and what behaviors to watch for. He nearly took everything from me. She leaned forward slightly toward the camera. I am here tonight because Lavinia trusted me enough to ask. Don't let him do to you what he almost did to me. The feed ended. Dr. Vane turned and walked quickly toward the side exit. The 2 men in dark suits caught him before he cleared the doorframe. He didn't struggle for long. Corbett lunged, toward Bethany, not toward the door. "Tell them, Bethany. Tell them what I told you." Two plainclothes officers rose from table 8. They had Corbett's arms before he reached her. I looked at my watch. 9:27. I looked toward Portia. She was already standing, holding a court document above her head, so Judge Harold Fenn, seated at table 4, a 30-year client and old friend, could read it clearly. "Your Honor," Portia said, "the emergency injunction is now in effect." The screen behind me shifted to bold red text. "Transfer blocked. Court order in effect." At 9:29, every account connected to Ainsley Consulting LLC froze. At 9:30, officers read Corbett his rights. Bethany watched from 10 feet away with both hands pressed to her mouth. At 9:31, Dr. Archibald Vane was informed of his arrest on 4 counts of fraud and 2 counts of conspiracy to commit elder financial abuse. I turned off the microphone. The room was loud, then it was very quiet. And then I heard my daughter. She sat down hard in her chair and put her face in her hands and made a sound I hadn't heard her make since she was a child. Something between a sob and a held breath. I stepped off the podium and crossed the room. I sat beside her. I didn't say anything, I just sat there. "I didn't know about the debt," she finally said, barely audible. "He showed me things. Meeting notes where you'd gone quiet, emails where you'd used the wrong name for a client. He said Dr. Vane was worried. He said we needed to protect you before you made a mistake that hurt the company. He fabricated all of it." "I know that now." She looked up, her eyes were swollen. I wanted to believe he loved me, so I stopped asking questions I was afraid to have answered. I looked at her. "He did love you," I said, "in the way that people like that are capable of love. That's what made him dangerous." She started crying again. I let her cry. 8 months passed. Corbett Ainsley, whose legal name had been changed from a prior identity with 2 earlier fraud convictions in another state, was sentenced in March. 11 counts total, 12 years in federal prison. The gambling debt was folded into a federal forfeiture case, and Denton Varga was indicted separately in January. Dr. Archibald Vane lost his medical license in November. His civil trial began in February. Odette Farrow testified in person, composed and precise. 3 additional victims came forward in the months after the wedding. The facility in Delwood was placed under separate regulatory investigation. Vane was sentenced to 9 years in state prison. He wept at sentencing. I did not. Hartley Occasions recovered. We brought back 2 of the 3 clients we'd lost. A third sent a contract inquiry in January and a letter of apology shortly after. Garland was promoted to Chief Operations Officer with a formal board resolution. We added dual approval requirements to every financial transaction above $10,000. The changes we should have made years ago. In November, I underwent a complete independent cognitive evaluation. Not because I needed to, but because I wanted a formal record. The neuropsychologist who administered it shook my hand at the end and said, "Mrs. Hartley, your executive function scores are in the top 8% for any age group." I thanked him. I didn't feel triumphant. I felt like I'd spent 8 months learning to doubt myself, and I wanted those months back. I could not have them. Bethany moved to Portland in July. She found work at a boutique event firm there. Mid-sized, good reputation, nothing to do with me. She sent brief-up emails at first. She called twice. In September, we talked for 40 minutes about a hiking trail she'd found and a therapist she'd been seeing and how strange it was to realize you had loved someone completely and been entirely wrong about who they were. "How do you trust again after that?" she asked. "Slowly," I said, "and not all at once." In October, she wrote me a letter, 5 handwritten pages. She told me about the specific moment the full extent of it landed, not at the wedding, but weeks later, going through files Corbett had left on a shared cloud account. Spreadsheets with my clients' private financial histories, her own signature on documents she hadn't fully read. She wrote, "I trusted him more than I trusted myself. And I think I did that because I'd spent years feeling like I had to earn my place with you. With him, I felt like I already had it. I didn't understand what that was costing me until it was too late." I read that letter 3 times. Then I sat in my husband's chair by the window and thought about every evening I had worked late, while Bethany ate dinner alone. Every weekend, I had taken calls during her school performances. Every time she had told me about her day, and I'd listened with half my mind because the other half was already at the next morning's logistics. I hadn't been a bad mother, but I hadn't always been a present one. Corbett had walked into a gap I had opened, and he had used it with precision. I wrote her back 2 pages. I said, "You were right that you had to earn your place. I made it that way. I was so focused on protecting what your father and I built that I forgot the most important part of that legacy was you. I am sorry for every meal I missed. For every time you needed me to sit still and I couldn't. You didn't betray me because you were weak. You were manipulated because you were lonely. I forgive you completely. And I am asking you to forgive me too. I love you. I always have. Mom." I mailed it on a Thursday. She called on Sunday. We talked for 2 hours. In May, nearly a year after the wedding that had ended before the cake was cut, I drove to Portland. We met at a farmer's market near her apartment. She was waiting by a flower stand, wearing a yellow jacket, and when she saw my car, she smiled. The real smile, the one that looked exactly like her father, and she crossed the street without waiting. We walked for 3 hours. We ate lunch at a small place she liked. She told me about a proposal she'd submitted at work and showed me photos from a hiking trail she'd started running on Saturday mornings. She asked about Garland. She asked of Maddie. She didn't ask about Corbett. We didn't need to talk about him. On the drive home, I passed my own exit and kept going for nearly a mile before I realized. I laughed out loud in the empty car, and then I was crying a little, and then I was just driving, watching the highway open up ahead of me in the late afternoon light. I had almost lost everything: my company, my freedom, my name, my ability to trust my own mind. I had also spent years choosing work over my daughter without ever meaning to. Both of those things were true. Both of them needed to be said out loud before either of them could begin to heal. I've heard people say that betrayal makes you harder. I don't think that's what it does. I think it makes you more careful about where you place your trust, and more intentional about the people who showed up when everything was falling apart. Maddie, who locked her front door and turned off the light and held my hands in the dark. Garland, who kept quiet for a week and then sent me one careful text. Portia, who stayed late and slid a business card across her desk without asking for thanks. Wendell Reed, who told me he owed something to a man he'd never had the chance to repay. Most of us already have people like that. We just forget to say so before the crisis comes. I got home just after dark. I made tea. I sat in my husband's chair and looked out at the yard. My phone buzzed, a text from Portland. I forgot to tell you, the firm wants me to lead a new account. Big nonprofit gala in December. I think I'm going to say yes. I smiled. Say yes, I wrote back. You've always been good at the ones that matter. She sent back a single heart. I set the phone down and looked out at the evening. The neighbor's lights, the ordinary Saturday, the life I had fought to keep. Intact, imperfect, and entirely mine. Tomorrow I would call my daughter just to talk. Not about the company, not about what had happened. Just to hear her voice and tell her I was glad she was finding her way. That was enough. That was everything.